Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Mendive. And today we have a brand new guest here brought to you via virtual room. And I'm so excited to have them on. I like to start every episode by having my guests introduce themselves. So, your name and how you identify for the people at home.
Hi there. My name is Naseer Samara. I'm a queer Palestinian Mexican writer, comedian, occasional director / actor / humanitarian / pathological liar.
I always like to know where my guests are from. So when people ask you, where are you from? What's the short version? What's the long version? You tell people.
The short version is I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. The long version is, diaspora baby, right? I mean, my father's Palestinian, and so much of my identity, I think, is shaped around the fact that there's a ongoing occupation. And so many Arabs throughout Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon had to leave. And a lot of that migration ended up happening with a lot of Latinos. So I think as time goes on, you're starting to see a lot more Arab Latino creatives. And I'm the result of a lot of, fucked up colonialization and imperialism.
Yeah. And so I am curious about your parents' story. So, like, what is your parents' story? Where are they from? How did your family end up in LA?
So my dad immigrated probably around 70s. And then my mom, she's actually... Oh God, I studied anthropology in college, but I always forget like the generational line. So I think she'd be considered third generation Mexican American. So my mom's mom, their parents, they would have been born in Mexico. So I guess that makes her third. I don't know. I did do really well in anthropology, I promise. I just always forget this. But anyway, my mom was born actually in Wichita, Kansas. So my mom's mom, my grandmother, she was one of 17 brothers and sisters. So the kids sort of were kind of born and raised throughout Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. But my grandmother, being the oldest girl of the 17, she pretty much tried to get out of Wichita as quick as possible. So she came down to California. And then my mom and my tío were sort of ping-ponging back and forth between LA and Wichita, like throughout a lot of their childhood. And then when my mom was probably around 13, 14, settled in Los Angeles. So she's pretty much like an LA girl for all intents and purposes. And then, I guess it's not really that terribly romantic of a story, but like when my mom and dad were in their late 20s, I mean, I think at that time my mom was selling insurance. My dad's friend was a potential client, and they kind of had like a friend cute meetup. And then my dad and my mom ended up, meeting that way and dated for 5 years and then got married and then had kids. And then I was one of them.
And so, like, what did your parents do for a living? What did they do for work growing up?
So my mom is probably one of like the last rare breeds of women that like all they want to be is a stay-at-home mom, and like the best stay-at-home mom. So my mom is a homemaker, and was truly like just like the best at it. Like for you, still, if I asked her to iron my jeans, she'd get very excited. And my dad's a civil engineer. Part of when my dad came here was also for, the education system, got an engineering degree, and basically worked very hard all of his life. Before he was an engineer, he was working at different factories here in LA. And eventually basically put himself through school that way. That was kind of their meet occupational love story, I guess.
Yeah. And so, like, what part of LA did you grow up in?
So I was conceived, I popped out at Kaiser Hospital on Cadillac, but then I was living in Hawthorne until I was about 5. And then we left that apartment and then moved to Playa del Rey. And my parents have been in that house ever since. So that's where I grew up.
Got it. So can you tell us a little bit about that neighborhood? Like, what was it like growing up there? Can you describe it for people that have never been there?
To Hawthorne?
No, to Playa del Rey.
I can describe both. Well, we left the Hawthorne building because my brother and I were playing with a crack pipe at age 5 that we found outside our house. And my dad was like, we can't live here anymore. So then when we moved to Playa, I mean, Playa is it's kind of like a very quiet beach town. The one thing I love about it is I can never live in a small city within LA where if you can do everything in that city, I can't live there. So if there's not a school, a middle school or a high school or a local grocery store, if you can do everything there, I think it's a very bad sign. For example, El Segundo, California. Conceivably, you could go to preschool, elementary, middle, high school. They have everything there. They have restaurants. They have that. And I think that sort of hive mentality is why El Segundo is so racist. So that's what I'm saying. I can't live in a city where everything is if you have to leave, you got to leave the city at some point, wherever pocket you're from. That's to me the sign if you live in a bad part of LA. If you can just kind of do everything there, you got to get out. So, but to that point, there was not a lot in Playa. There's no middle school. There's no big local grocery store. You have to leave Playa. It's pretty much just these little kind of slightly suburby, but then there's also beach shacks, and then there's not a downtown Playa del Rey. There is sort of now, but it was never like that growing up. Yeah, so sleepy, I guess, would be the word to describe the city.
I always like to get a sense of people during their high school years. So 14 to 18, I frame it in these 3 questions. Who were you? Who were you pretending to be? And how do you think other people saw you?
Who was I? Closeted. The bigger version of that would be, well, in elementary and middle school, I was not cool. I was not cool. And I think I was just very uncomfortable being so many different things. I was uncomfortable being Arab with the crazy ass first and last name for most people. I was uncomfortable being Latino. I was comfortable being closeted. You know what I mean? It was just I think it ended up, those were just not good times. So by the time I got to high school, I don't really know if it was life that sort of taught me to be funny or taught me to deflect, you know what I mean? I could use humor as part of my identity. I was actually very cool and very well liked in high school. I think kind of people always saw me as sort of this effervescent, bubbly kind of person. That being said, though, the older I get, I like my years in high school less and less because I went to a predominantly white high school. And, I'm just having these callbacks to really fucked up things I would hear or see that didn't seem like that big of a deal at the time, or maybe it didn't hit me as much because I was just so in my own head about presenting myself as this goofy, fun theater kid that was also in student council, that I was also in orchestra. I was very involved. So I was kind of known as just the kind of, I don't know, an all around, just he does everything. Oh my God, that Naseer, he's just so wild, But yeah, no, the older I get, I truly hate high school for all of it more and more. Even other things that for sure happened to me that are, that were really fucked up. Like I said, it was a constant sense of bearing just really traumatic shit eventually, especially by 11th grade, 12th grade. But I think what it ended up doing is it ended up sharpening my skills of just being a funny person, because that was kind of all I had to sort of get by and, protect myself. I don't even know if I answered your question. I'm sorry. That was the longest rant of a monologue.
But I am curious of you having this sort of mixed identity,
to put it mildly. Yes.
Yeah. And so how did that fit in in the world that you were walking around with, how you saw yourself, how what your household was like?
I mean, that's the thing. It's in some ways it's that thing where it's that classic smallest violin, I don't belong anywhere, but I just don't understand a stranger household to go in. My dad is Muslim, my mom is Catholic. they practice their own religions. They're still happily married. My mom will fast during Ramadan. My dad will be opening presents on Christmas. Like it's just a weird. I've always had a weird upbringing. In terms of like too, just I don't even know what to really make of my identity, because at times where it does feel like, because of my name and my skin color and sort of the way I sort of outwardly present, that people sort of like assume that I'm only Arab, but at the same time, I don't know what it's like to have been raised or brought into this world by an Arab woman. You know what I mean? Like my mom was Mexican. My grandmother, who was Mexican, lived in my house till I was 17. So like so much of my identity and just like the way that I operate in the world was shaped by Mexican women, you know, and my mom's sister, my tia, is in like a weird hybrid relationship where she's my second mom, my sister, my best friend. So I've always just had a very strong feminine Mexican presence that's been, like I said, shaping so much of the way I operate. So it's very confused. I don't know how else to explain it.
And I'm curious about how have those like two communities sort of like, what has been your interactions with like the Arab community and then the like Latinx community?
I mean, it is sort of the weird thing, like I mentioned, where I still sort of carry these things of like, I don't really fit in anywhere. I think the good thing is that both cultures in a lot of ways mold and mix really nicely. The other thing too that's wild is half of my Palestinian family, I also have Palestinian Nicaraguan cousins, because my dad's dad. So this would have been like my great grandfather's. I think basically he had set up sort of a family in Palestine and sort of had set up a family in Nicaragua, multiple wives at that time. And yeah, I just have now also this like huge line of like, if you see them, they look 100% Nicaraguan, but they all have crazy ass Arab names. And it's like, it's what, and these are my cousins. It's just like, I don't know. I mean, I do know it's within the history of Palestine. There's, so many Palestinians in Chile, so many different Palestinians throughout, so many different communities. But I guess it really doesn't make sense, and it does make sense. I'm also a weird, terrible mutt because I speak horrible Arabic. I speak horrible Spanish. Like I truly am useless. I'm just this like mixed up, lost puppy dog of the Arab and Latinx world. It really doesn't make sense, but this is what it is.
I am curious about your relation to like each homeland. Like, what is your relationship to that?
Well, it's fucked, because on my mom's side, her family would have been from Monterrey, Mexico, but it's like third, fourth generation. So much of the identity is like really more California Mexican, and it's also really awkward because the fact that my grandmother was one of 17, I would say the first like 5 kids, which includes my grandmother, because they kind of like left to California in various stages of their lives, their Mexican identity, I would say, is preserved in a, how do I put this kindly? A more traditional sense for me, whereas the latter line of like, they didn't leave Kansas, and they're browner than me. Their last name is Espinosa, but they're fucking Republicans. They probably consider themselves white. Like, I learn every day in a new way that the Latinx community is not a monolith. But let me tell you, that side of our community, I don't want her. You know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And what about the Palestinian side?
Well, okay, so then that's the other thing that's also fucked up, because there's like a literal reason why I don't feel connected in a lot of ways to that identity, is because that connection was robbed from me. I mean, my dad, I don't even think, like someone who's born there, someone who had homes bulldozed and destroyed from the occupation, that identity too is like stripped from him. So like so much of just like, I guess, this understanding of like what is home, like I don't know if Palestine, first of all, will ever technically be allowed to be my home, but also even if that is the case, I will ever feel, I don't know. It's like I've been about 4 different times in my life. I was like 8 the first time I went. I was 10 the second time. and then I was 18, and then I was 20. So I haven't been in like 9 years. It never feels like I'm in a homeland that feels comfortable, but that's also because of the situation. You know what I mean? It's never allowed to be considered like, comfortable when you have to go through checkpoints when, I hear stories about, oh, this is where your grandfather planted all these olive trees that are now no longer here. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, what part of this feels like a sense of like peace and home?
I'm always curious when people, because, Palestine was in the news recently, it just goes through that like IG like outrage machine.
Well, what's funny is when I was in middle school and high school, you could not talk about Palestine.
Oh, absolutely not.
And even as so much as like 5 years ago, it was like a fireable offense for certain journalists, lawyers to even say anything remotely like Palestinians deserve human rights, like at the bare fucking minimum. And now I've been waiting like 30 years for Palestine to become this sort of like hipster, the infographics are now showing us in a positive light. But like truly, this shit took forever. But yes, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, and that's sort of my point. In high school, I knew a lot of people from the region, and sort of they let me know very quickly what was going on there, and I remember just my own formed opinion based off like what they were telling me and their experience and their families. It felt like, oh, this is a radical person for having these thoughts and opinions about what's going on there. And you're right, it has shifted over. So I'm always curious about when people see like part of their identity or a place that their family called home sort of go through that cycle. Like what is it like to like sort of have it be like front page news on the internet?
I think the sad thing is that I've gotten so desensitized in a lot of ways. I think for a lot of people, there's this like sense of awakening right now that's happening. And it's not like any of this is really particularly like news to me. It's not news that there are people serving time for being protesters. It's not news that there are women that are dying in checkpoints because they have to go to a hospital that's not in their village. And like none of this is bulldozing of homes, stealing of land. Like none of this is new. In my lifetime, like I said, I have never seen this much level of awakening and a consciousness. So that, I think, if anything, feels good and gratifying that like maybe we are moving towards some sense of progress. But I don't know, it's just weird. Like even I can't remember when Rashida Tlaib gave this speech, but like she had even mentioned like having experiences when she was a little girl and just her naming like the villages that she was going to. One of the villages she named is where my family's from. So it's like, I don't know. It is wild, I guess, when your own history is in so much like, I guess, dissection in the media. But to even bring it back, like to sort of just like the connectivity of it all, like it ends up being just like I have to laugh. That's all. Like when you look at even one of the architects that the United States was using to build the wall between the United States and Mexico, they had contacted Israeli architects because they're so good at building walls. Like that was essentially the belief. So it's like I can't help but like laugh, because if I don't laugh, I will cry at just like this very crazy level of just like the struggle of like stealing land and claiming identity is so weirdly fucked up and connected between US and Mexico versus Israel and Palestine and all of that. It's just, it's wild.
Yeah. I agree. I do like that there's been sort of this like change in that sort of conversation. Because I remember I was even a couple of years ago at a game night, and it was like those games where like things you're not supposed to say, and then it's like describe like Israel and Palestine in like 3 words, and everybody was like, even just with amongst friends, it was like choose your words carefully, and it's like, and it was very like middle ground. I was like, no, like free Palestine, like are we not on the same page here? It was
free Palestine, weird. Free Britney. These are all the things we need to free.
Getting back to like you and your life, I am curious of like what you did after high school. So like did you have a plan? Did things go according to plan?
Things did not go according to plan. Well, another thing is in high school, I was convinced I was going to go to theater school. Like I thought I was going to go to NYU, thought I was going to go to Emerson College, thought I was going to go to Boston, thought I was going to go to USC. All the places I definitely applied for their theater programs, got rejected from every single one. And let me tell you, as thespian president, as what was considered like the best director of our high school theater department, I was devastated. Like I was like baffled. It was the biggest crushing blow to like my ego and self-esteem. So when that didn't happen, I decided I was just going to go to community college and just figure out, you know, like my life basically. So I studied at SMC in LA, like never left, Santa Monica College. And that's basically when I started dabbling in anthropology and women's studies, which became both my majors in college. And I hate to say like it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me because like I don't know. I always hate when people like try to give like credit to certain failures. Like it's not because you failed that like you succeeded. It's like you succeeded because you have drive and passion. Like that's why you succeeded. Like life is always fucking testing you, but like it's not because you failed that you did bad. You know what I mean? Like I can't do that. I can't give credit to like, you know, fucking NYU for rejecting me and that's why I'm successful. Like no, fuck that shit. But anyway, so I studied anthropology and women's studies, transferred to UCLA. And there was a moment in time after I graduated where I was like, maybe I'm not going to like try to do anything in my passion, even though that was like still on my mind. Like I thought I would become maybe an anthropology professor or women's studies professor, and I probably would have done that and been quite happy. But after I graduated college, that's when I kind of was just sort of bopping around. And then I thought, you know what? Like you were really passionate about directing like theater, but even though that sort of dominated your time in high school, like what is it that like you really want to do? And growing up when I was a kid, I was always interested in film, like just movies. It was all because of my tia. My older brother and I would get into these like, you know, we started fighting around the age of 8 and 9, like kind of more seriously. And that's when basically he didn't really want to like hang out with me as a kid. So my tia, to pass the time of like on weekends and stuff, she would always take me to movies. And I was watching movies that I should not have been watching at a very young age, but like it kind of sort of morphed my perspective into like, you know, she introduced me to Pedro Almodovar. She introduced me to, like just like international cinema in general. And I think that's sort of where I just hadn't really realized how much I had been like so knowledgeable about film. So then I thought, okay, well, if now that I'm graduating college and now that I'm starting to figure out what I want to do, why don't I try to like work in film? So basically I would be like interning at different production companies. I was interning at different agencies, just basically like reading script coverage and like learning that whole side. And then I was like, well, maybe I should just like make a short film. So this was around 2015 that I wrote, directed, and acted in my first short film. And then that film ended up getting into some film festivals, which was great. And this is sort of when I was kind of like, okay, this feels like great that I can sort of independently do this, but I still need to be like actively working towards a career in film and television. And then I eventually got my first production assistant job and worked my way from being a PA to, I was a set PA, I was an office PA, and then I ended up becoming a director's assistant on an ABC television show called Downward Dog. And on that show, once we wrapped the first season, the showrunners hired me full time as their showrunner's assistant. And this is the longest story ever. I'm so sorry, but it does have a point in terms of like breaking into the industry is like, the only advice that I can give in terms of the roadmap of my life is independently work on your own projects while actively getting jobs in the entertainment industry if you can. Like I said, I broke in by working as a set PA, worked my way up as a showrunner assistant to eventually getting a manager through like my short film work. And, you know, the showrunners that I was working for basically set up that connection. And that's how I got my first staff writing job. So it, in a way, is like, it's all important. Like, it's important to be sort of like independently working on your own stuff while also, if you can finally get that first PA job in the industry, like you can rise eventually through that. At least I was able to.
Yeah, and sort of how did you even know that this was sort of like the path forward for yourself? I think like just because also you live in LA, like did you have any sort of connection, any sort of know-how just from being in the city?
I mean, that's the thing. I don't come from like I have no connections as far as it comes with my dad's a Palestinian immigrant engineer. My mom is just basically cooking me breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like I mean, like that was stay at home. Like that we didn't. There was no connections to like Hollywood. You know what I mean? But I knew that like if I had just if I could just get like that PA job, which like I said, I in my head sort of I didn't get my first PA job until I was 25. I wasn't hardcore looking before then, but like because I took those like jobs at different production companies and different agencies, like there was a roster of just talent that was coming in. And eventually, the agents thought my script coverage was really good. That was one thing that I would like I did well at that job that did not pay money because it was an internship. And then because their roster had certain producers, I eventually was like, are you in the need for any PAs? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's weird how every job has been like in some way helpful for me to get to the next step. And like, that's not to say that like, there is a way for you to get those PA jobs that eventually turn into writers jobs. Like that doesn't always happen. You know what I mean? But it somehow happened for me. Like, you know what I mean? And I started, like I said, PAing in 2015. I didn't get my first staff writing job until this year. So it wasn't like an overnight success. I have been actively working in the entertainment industry since 2015. So what is that? 5, 6? So it took 6 years, 7 years? I mean, still, it's like that's not short, but that's also not long. I mean, it's taken people a lot longer.
Mm-hmm. And so, you mentioned your short films, and, I have seen some of them, but I'm just
Did you hate them? Tell me. How bad were they?
No, I watched it, but I'm just like, this person's speaking my language. I love the underlying rage and also like just the need to like be screaming, get woke, everybody. Like, why? I'm tired of just like existing and like having these things brushed upon me. How do we stop this?
Okay, well, here's one thing I'll say, and this can also be considered advice for your listeners if anyone is, I would say in general, I wrote and directed 2 short films, and both of the like content of those films in different ways is like you said, there's this underlying rage that I have, but there also I consider myself like exclusively like a comedy writer. How do I put this also lightly? There was a long period of time that white people did not like my shit. Like,
oh, absolutely,
and
I can see that.
Yeah, you're like, oh well, whatever do you mean?
Like, of course. Honestly, some of your films are just like just point a camera at me and like have me at like somebody's dinner party.
Yes. So even the film festivals my films got into, they were like very specialty market film festivals, like the Arab Film Festival in LA, the Arab Film Festival in San Francisco, Miznes Film Festival, the Latinx Film Festival of Tucson, like just like very like small film festivals, and then some medium-sized ones. But even those, it was like they're specialty markets. Like I couldn't even get any of my films in any like queer-based film festivals because the content I think was so divisive in some ways to their communities as well.
Oh, absolutely. You're speaking directly to the programmers.
So I'm not trying to say to your listeners, make work that's palatable to white people, but the gatekeepers, unfortunately, in this industry are still largely white. And it's not that like I, tamed my voice to be more palatable. Absolutely not. But you really then have to like find the white people that get it. And I'm lucky that I was able to. You know what I mean? Like even the showrunners, I love them to death, John Hoberg and Kat Lickle, like they understand my voice, but like that doesn't mean everyone is going to. And that goes for managers, that goes for showrunners. Like at the end of the day, like the overwhelming people that are giving opportunities are white. And it's this weird catch-22 that I'm always sort of in my feelings with my writing, because if I can't I refuse as a Taurus, double Cancer, moon rising, to like change my voice. But I am also fully cognizant of the fact that like there are people that are in my community and not in my community that are not going to get it and or not going to like it, you know, quite frankly.
So yeah, so just for the audience, like what sort of shit were you making? Like what was the stuff that was coming out when you're like, I'm making my own films?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. There was a period of time also in my mid 20s that I thought like I wanted to be an actor. So that was a part of the story that I've missed out. But like once I graduated college too, like I had a commercial agent and I was going on commercial auditions. And it was like just the amount of racism I endured as a commercial actor. You know what I mean? Like I remember going on, I don't know if it was, oh God, I won't name the fast food chain, but you can imagine, like, you know, I would do the audition and they would literally say things like, okay, great. Can you say it in Spanish? And I'm like, why? This commercial, as far as I know, is not going to be airing on Telemundo. Like, why do I have to perform this spot for you? And it's like, oh, we just want to see. And I'm like, okay. So like, I barely get through like a few lines because I don't speak Spanish well. And then it was like, okay, great. Like, we won't have that. You know what I mean? It's just like dumb shit like that. So a lot of my writing voice in my early days, like I said, there was so much rage that I experienced that I hadn't even unpacked, like I mentioned earlier, from like high school, certain rage that I've just like had built up through my life, that's kind of where I like decided I'm going to write, because I'm going to write these things that like not only no one else is really doing, I'm going to write these things for my own mental health. I'm also going to write these things because no one else is going to write the role that's like right for me. You know what I mean? So I guess that's where sort of a lot of that led to the themes of my first film, which was called Temporary. And it was about a mixed race commercial actor who couldn't book. But, you know, he was also just bopping through his own like fucked up shit of having a living situation, because the whole theme of the film was he couldn't come out to his parents. He couldn't come out to his parents that he was like failing as a professional actor. So it was like the theme of it was just generally like all of this shit is sort of temporary, but yet he still couldn't get out of it. And then my second short film was called The Candle. That was I hate to use this term, but it was sort of like my concept of like the oppression Olympics, but I would say it was a much more nuanced take than whatever Ginny and Georgia had recently did. That was sort of my way of dealing with just like this constant noise machine of like white people typically just putting a lot of us in boxes in our lives. So I kind of just leaned into it. It was the setup was much more like a play, which I thought was really like cool at the time, that I could meld in just like my understanding of theater with that. And like I said, another film that was difficult for many to understand, but the ones that got it really liked it.
Like, was television something that you always wanted to write for? Like, you know, you mentioned you were like super into filmmaking. So I'm just curious of like where that TV aspect sort of came in for you.
It really didn't kick in until I started working with John Hoberg and Kat Lickle as showrunners. They really sort of shaped and defined my television voice. Because, you know, like before that, it's not like I was writing television samples. Like I said, I was really interested in theater, then eventually became interested in film, worked on my own short films. Like I had not had like a plethora of pilot samples or anything like that. But when I was with them, I very quickly learned, because they always viewed me more than an assistant. They viewed me as like a mentor. So very quickly on, it was like showing me the development process of like, this is how pilots get made. This is how pilots get approved through the studio. These are what notes calls. Like I was on all of that. And like I said, it was a very good like training wheels of understanding what networks are looking for and what studios are looking for. But not only that, like how to actually do it, what the scripts are supposed to look like, what they're supposed to, an act structure, like all of that. I mean, yes, I sure could have quickly learned online, but also to see it like from actual people that were working. That's eventually when I sort of was like, wait, can I write for television? Could I do this? And they also were very encouraging to that as well, because, you know, I mean, there's only so, as you know, there's only so many people that are actively working and that are of communities of color. There's millions of people trying to break in, but in terms of people that are like really there, I mean, we can kind of count on our hand, right? I mean, that's the sad truth. But yeah, so I mean, this would have been 2017, 16 that eventually I was sort of heavily considering becoming a TV writer, and then started coming up with my own original pilots. Like I have tons of stuff, and then was privately showing things to John and Kat, and then eventually they encouraged me to get a manager, and that's when I felt like I had the confidence to get one. This was all around 2020 that was happening.
Yeah. And so like, how did you end up getting staffed on iCarly? Can you tell us that story?
So, like I said, it was around 2020 that I got my manager, still love her. And I had basically spent the pandemic interviewing on different shows, and eventually met with the showrunner of iCarly. And I think I did well on the interview because I got the job. But, I think what's funny too is even before iCarly, I'm so fucking neurotic that like there were moments where I would say generally, like I think every interview did go well. You know what I mean? But the thing is, when you even get to this spot, which is like a beautiful place to be in, there's a million reasons why you don't get the job, even when you interview well. But like, see, the problem is when you're someone like me that's like fucked up with, like a self-sabotaging mixed race queer person, like you talk yourself into like tons of reasons of like, still, you're not Arab enough to work on that show. You're not Mexican enough to work on that show. You're not the type of gay that they want to hire for that show. It's a lot. So I'm very thankful that I got my first job on iCarly, because it in some ways ended up being like I wasn't asked to be like the brown token. Do you know what I mean? Like if I had gotten staffed on, let's say an example, like a show like Rami, right? Like there's a sense that maybe if they had like a queer character that like, oh, Naseer clearly is supposed to speak to this queer Arab character. Not to say that that's bad, but like in a lot of ways, I'm very thankful for my first staff writing job that was just like, oh, this guy's funny. And he happens to be Arab, he happens to be Mexican, he happens to be queer. But like all of that is to say, all of those things are cool. And we like his take on like this cool internet girl. You know what I mean? So, I'm very thankful for that environment. I'm very thankful for our showrunner, Ali Shouten, shout out. Because I wasn't tokenized for my first experience. Like it just ended up being like, we like this kid. Let's hear what he has to say.
Yeah, and that sort of was my initial thought when I saw that you were hired for that show. I was like, oh, like I guess they hired him because he was funny. Like it didn't seem like there was like this is your piece here, and we'll only come for you for that. And it's like,
I know.
He's just like a regular writer who's hired at a show just because.
I always like to say this too when it comes to just like life, but like just treat me like a white woman. You know what I mean? Like that's my whole service. Like if I go to a restaurant, treat me like a white woman. I want the same service that white woman gets, And yes, I'm it's funny that you actually even noticed that yourself too, because like the other really amazing thing about the room is that like there really wasn't any tokens. Like I wasn't the only even queer writer in the room. There were multiple Black writers in the room. There were a good percentage of women across different orientations, different ethnic backgrounds. Like they did a really good job on this show of just like making sure that no one was a token. Yes, there were no other queer Arab Mexicans, but I'm also tend to be the only one of that. But there was also Danny Fernandez, Danny NY Danny, because there are two Danny Fernandez's in our industry. This is gay male Danny Fernandez, who's Cuban. You know what I mean? And he ended up being like a really great. His presence alone, you know what I mean, was just like very comfortable just to have like another queer Latinx writer. But Francesca Ramsey was also one of the co-producers and writers who is the greatest human being alive. And I'm so thankful for a lot of what she did for the show, in the room, outside of the room. Like I said, our showrunner was great. Kate Stayman London, who is an amazing writer as well. Like these are all people that like I'm just very thankful to have in the room for my first job. That was, you know, like I said, hopefully I was just hired because I happen to be funny more than anything else.
Yeah, and so this show it's like iCarly, but now it's like rebooted on Paramount. It's like more grown up. And so I'm just curious, like, because it seems like you're having a ton of fun on that show. It seems like just from online posting and all that stuff, like you guys are having a blast. You've broken the internet already a couple times with some iconic
with my
meme.
Episode. Listen, the interesting meme, episode 3, written by Naseer Samara.
I do want to talk about the meme because I'm just curious of like how did that even pop into your head, and then it sort of like actually comes to be, because I think it's like if it's engineered, sometimes it feels a little phony, but it was like, why is this perfect? And I think it also suits like someone who's like been on the internet a while and sort of knows how it works, and like they're like, oh, they'll like this.
Yeah, I mean, we had very early on, I basically was sort of privately working on my own, like, what would my dream iCarly story be? As a first-time staff writer, obviously, like, a lot of people tend to hire us because we're there to pitch jokes. We're there to pitch jokes definitely before pitching story, but, like, I think for any first-time writers, staff writers that get those room opportunities, if you do have an opportunity, it's like it's always best to like let everyone else in the room lead, but that doesn't mean that you can't privately be like kind of working and conceiving on your own thing. So basically very early on in the room, I was trying to come up with like, my idea of an iCarly story. We were encouraged to sort of like always sort of where are the conflicts coming from? Is it like Carly and her brother conflict story, or Carly and Freddie conflict story, Carly and Harper conflict story? So I was sort of always tangling with the idea of Carly versus Spencer, because Spencer is kind of like my favorite character when the original was on. I think it was our consulting producer, Esther Pavitsky, that sort of brought up this, like, how big Miranda was like a meme star, Miranda Cosgrove, Carly. Like she was like, there's just been a lot of memes of Miranda, like in life. And, I was like, yeah, wait, that's, yes, there has been. And like, that's all she said. And then I got like my wheels turning where I was like, oh, we need to bring back that interesting meme. Like that was always my favorite. The other one that was like really popular too, I know Miranda also likes it's this one where she's at the Kids Teen Choice Awards or something, and it's like when you're high at McDonald's, and it's like it's just her face is like she has the best face. It's like I don't understand why her face just works with so many memes, but it just does. So I knew because of like Paramount Plaza, I was like, we probably can't talk about drugs. So I was like, the interesting meme, like I need to just like kind of figure out like what is the best possible way to bring this back. And it ended up being that like I was conceiving this story around like, how do I make Spencer, who's this artist, like people always like use the phrase like, oh, that meme is art. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's like just so stupid like, to me. So like, I was like, but like, what would an actual artist like have to say about like meme culture? So then I was like, oh, okay, well then, and then like, you built sort of the story around that natural relationship as brothers and sisters of what maybe an artist versus an internet personality person, how they could conceive, and then built the story out that way. And then once that was built, then we found like a natural place to add the meme where it wasn't so, fisted. But I'm very thankful that I, first of all, even got an episode as first-time staff writer, but I'm also thankful that like I can look at that episode of iCarly and be like, oh, this feels like Naseer. Like it's just, there's a lot of like, there's a lot of takes on, it's a very satirical take, I think, on everything that happens on the internet versus whether it's like how to apologize, cancel culture, influencer culture, what influencers, if they had to be activists, quote unquote, what that would look like. It's just a lot of dumb shit that I was really thrilled to have. And I think I can sort of always, I think if you saw the list of iCarly episodes and just read out the outlines, you'd be like, oh, well, Naseer wrote that one, which feels cool.
Yes, no, I noticed that too. It was just like, because, it's like TV's collaborative. Like It's like no one really writes an episode. It's just sort of like, and I'm like, I see his fingerprints all over this one. Like,
well, that's what's the other great thing about iCarly is that, like, yeah, it is a very collaborative process. And, you know, what was really great is we had like a lot of the writers I had mentioned, you know, like some of my best jokes are in a lot of other people's episodes. And then a lot of Kate's, Francesca, Danny's jokes are in throughout like other people's episodes. And like I said, it's the rewrite rooms, which, you know, our showrunner was great at just like organizing and navigating. Like, you know, it's like the whole thing feels like this true collaborative process where everyone could sort of have their DNA, but like we still are making the show that we need to make.
And, you know, I'm always curious about when writers start working in rooms, like what are some lessons that you sort of picked up that you started applying to your own writing? You know, sort of now that you get this, you see how the sausage is made, you're like, oh, like this is a good thing for myself.
Well, the best advice that I could give to also any staff writer, it's very important, is your purpose is to be just like you're one sailor, right? So you're not steering the ship. You're not trying to get the ship to move in other directions. You're just there to push the ship to where the showrunner, the upper level writers are trying to push it. Like that's your job, is to help push it that direction. Of course, like when your input is requested or, you know, etc. But like your job is just to keep the ship going where it needs to go. And I feel like I successfully was able to do that on this job. But now that I have been like in that position, it becomes this other sense of like, oh, if I'm fortunate and lucky enough to keep working in this business, that rule is very important, especially even as you get higher up in your career. Because another thing that's great is like, if I am fortunate enough to be, you know, show running, let's say my own work, you know what I mean? It's like so much of like what makes a show great is having just like that really distinctive point of view and stamp of like a very passionate showrunner. So like the writer's room really is assembling that team that's going to understand what the showrunner also wants and like to push that needle forward. I think what was great about this job is it really did give me a lot of confidence to know that like as long as I keep working, like I'm going to hit that target eventually. And then, you know, I feel like every room is really a lesson in terms of just like, it's a lesson in how to get someone else's job done. You know what I mean? So like, it really is important to learn those lessons, because when you get to a position, really all that you're learning is like, well, now what do I want to do and what do I not want to do that I've learned throughout these previous jobs? You know what I mean? Because no room is perfect. You're going to see things like, well, I might have done things differently, but it's not your job to like push back. It's not really your job to question. It's your job to just get the job done the way that they want to get it done. But then you write down, maybe I would do this differently. So then when you're in that opportunity, you do it differently. Really, it's just important to be like collaborative and say yes to everything, I think. I don't know. It's like I said, it's been helpful for me. It's the only advice I can give. Be good at your job. Do it. I don't know.
So I'm curious about your own writing. You know, what are some of the themes? Because sometimes as writers, we tell the same story over and over. So what is, if there's through lines through all your work, what do you feel like you're always writing about?
Man, that was some subtle shades. Sometimes we tell the same stories over and over.
No, it's not shade. Like I do that all the time. I'm just like, why do I keep writing about this? It's like, because you're trying to sort through your own shit, you know?
Oh, well, that's the thing is, I wouldn't say I'm completely sorting through my own shit, but what I would say that there was always the constant theme early in my work was people who were actively pushing through trying to have a win, like in their culture, through their culture, and like being pushed down by society. You know what I mean? I think well, another thing I see a lot in just like in television is like, not good or bad. It's just that like a lot of characters typically from, you know, marginalized communities, the lead is usually someone that's like, it's like, I'm awkward in my own like community. And oftentimes they're typically like fighting against their culture. So the thing that I find in my work is I'm never like fighting against it. I'm always like trying to fight in it and fight through it. The outcome is just, it's never usually positive because whatever external factors. And it's truly just kind of, I've just noticed like that would it be say like the theme. And I wouldn't say I'm trying to move away from that the older I get, but I guess there's always just that sort of like, I don't know. I guess it's the only way I can feel I can sort of say something hopefully prolific, as if I try to just have this, I don't know, slightly negative result or outcome from like actively trying. It feels like it's like the only way I can sort of make a statement about just like, you know, I'm not annoyed at the fact that I'm brown and gay, but society has taught me to struggle, you know? So it's like, I like showing that, but it's not really about the character at odds with themselves. It's more of like, you know, trying to break through, it feels like, is just generally the theme of my work through comedic lenses. That whole paragraph that I just recited sounds like there wasn't an inch of comedy in there. That's kind of my mission statement. You know, I'm also at a crossroads in my life where I am trying to sort of return to like this like joyful childhood self that like I think we all have. But like what's funny is I think life, well, it's definitely life and society has taught me to sort of be a hardened cunt. And in a way, it also is the reason why I'm a comedy writer, because that was the way I processed through all of this. But now that I'm in, you know, I'm 31, like it feels like, where is the new sort of tone and new direction going? So I would say, you know, in this current moment, I am actively trying to find more of the childhood joy in my writing. I won't say, you know, like the few ideas I have currently that are in various stages of development, which is exciting, but I would say there is still a wink to the, you know, cross-cultural clash versus society for sure, but there is more of the less rageful and more joyful through line, I think, in this new era of my work.
I mean, I'm right there with you. Like my new motto is just like grow up and also lighten up a little bit. Like,
oh, wow, that's great. That's very, yes, that's probably where the exact tone of my writing would have been in my 20s, would grow up, and now in my 30s it's lighten up.
so I'm always curious of like who my guests are a fan of. So who are the writers that you admire? These could be peers, friends, heroes of yours, people you creep on social media who don't know who you are, but you're obsessed with their work. So who are some of those people for you?
Well, obviously from like a show running perspective, I think what Tanya Saracho has obviously done and Stephen Canals is like that roadmap is just very inspiring. So in terms of just like a modeling of a career, like that would be the goal. And I think what's very interesting about like Latinx writers and representation is like, you know, this innate desire and ability to like bring us all together. And I think that's all we can do as a community. But at the same time, what I would say is there is still what I'm seeing, a sort of homogenized identity that's being represented and being seen. So, you know, I think I would encourage a lot of the new wave of Latinx writers coming up to even have more of an inclusive understanding of like, how can we make Latinx behind the scenes representation and in front of the camera representation as diverse as our community actually is. But in terms of like, you know, like I said, Stephen and Tanya, I think are just like excellent examples of just like trying to portray the diversity that is within our community.
And so where can people follow you on social media?
They can follow me. The children can follow me on Instagram, I would say is my like biggest, like in terms of the most of the platform that I use the most, which is at the Naseer Samara. So TheNassesserSamara. That is also my Twitter handle that I barely tweet on, but still occasionally do. And that is also my TikTok handle that I have yet to post a single video. TikTok is so overwhelming as an app. I haven't figured it out. Francesca Ramsey, close friend, colleague, she's getting better at it and trying to explain it to me. But like, let me tell you, I don't get it. I don't understand it. My algorithm hasn't figured me out. I just want to watch Mexican grandmas beat their kids with their sandals. That's all I want to watch. And I can't, my algorithm hasn't gotten me there yet. I will listen. So all you listeners, if you want to socially distance come over to my house and teach me how to use TikTok, I will pay you for your time.
I'm sure there's people out there that do that. I promise you.
Yeah, but I want to support small businesses. So if you are a listener that has a small business of taking clients like me that are really bad with their phones, teach us how to use technology, please let me know. You know where to find me.
And so like I like to ask my guests to help me title the episode. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. In the blank, you put as many as you want, any words as you want. You can mix all around, just whatever feels true to you. You're writing this conversation. I also use it as a community building tool so that when someone sees your title, they can be like, oh, that's like me. I should check this out, listen to this, see this person's work.
Let's go with queer, sarcastic, Arab, Latinx writer.
Perfect. And with that, I want to thank you so much for being on the pod. This was such a fun conversation. I'm glad we finally got to meet virtually.
Yeah, this was great. I really appreciate you holding space for so many amazing Latinx writers. And I'm glad that I could be even included in the conversation. And you are a joy. You are a delight. For all of the listeners that are also hiring writers, Ruben is truly just a talent and a joy. And if I don't give him his first job, someone else will, but I would be happy to do it.